magazine, but we don't read encyclicals, we don't read the catechism. Why not? Right? That's negligence. Why is it that we've decided reading people every week is absolutely necessary for my life? Whereas reading the catechism, oh my gosh, well that would be super hyper Catholic, and I don't know I'm ready to be a super hyper Catholic. Yeah. Sources of ignorance. Ignorance of Christ and his gospel, bad example given by others, enslavement to one's passions, assertion of a mistaken notion of autonomy of conscience, rejection of the church's authority and her teaching, lack of conversion and of charity. These can be the source of errors of judgment and moral conduct. We should be trying to get to know Christ better all the time. We should follow the example of good people, not bad people. We should be trying to be free of our passions. We should understand the nature of conscience. We should understand church authority. We should have conversion and charity. This is going to keep us from errors of judgment. If we aren't doing those things, we're likely to make errors of judgment. Willed ignorance, sometimes we actually don't want to know. I don't want to know often. I mean, I don't want to step on the scale every day. I know it would do me a lot of good. I don't want to check how many calories are in certain things. I don't want to know, because if I knew, I'd have to live differently. So a lot of us are deliberately ignorant of church teaching because we say, I don't want to know, because if I knew, I might have to change my behavior. And again, it's like stupid for me. I mean, I want my weight to be less, and if I don't want to get on the scale, it's working against me instead of for me, right? And so we have to realize how many times we're actually willing not to know, right? Because we don't want to change our behavior. Sometimes we are what's called invincible ignorant. If, on the contrary, the ignorance is invincible, or the moral subject is not responsible for his erroneous judgment, the evil committed by the person cannot be imputed to him. It remains no less an evil, a privation, a disorder. One must therefore work to correct the errors of moral conscience. I think an enormous number of Catholics in our culture, maybe Catholic healthcare workers as well, are what I would call invincibly ignorant, honestly, about contraception. Right? They don't know the church is teaching, and to some extent it's not their fault. Because a lot of us think, well, if it were bad, somebody would be telling us that. I mean, most Catholics know that contraception is wrong, or at least know the church teaches it wrong. How? Because they heard it on the nightly news, right? They heard David Jennings or something say, well, here's the Holy Father in Africa, preaching against contraception in spite of all these dying people in Africa. So that's how Catholics, I know it's wrong. I heard it on the nightly news. They didn't hear it from the pulpit, right? So they often, they get everything. They get all their teaching from church at Mass on Sunday. They're not reading the catechism, they're not reading encyclicals, they're not getting a Catholic newspaper, they're not getting not reading the diocesan newspaper. You want to say, wow, I mean, they may be at fault for that, but they're not being told they should do that either. How many times from the pulpit have we been told, you really ought to read the diocesan newspaper. You really ought to be reading the catechism. You ought to be coming to a conference to learn something about church teaching. And so Catholics are not being informed. So I don't know how guilty they are for their bad behavior. This is, I use this example to my students all the time. They have a hard time with it. But this girl, let's say she's 13 and she's pregnant, and her mother tells her that, getting an abortion is just getting some tissue taken out of your system. You're not killing a human being. You're just getting a little tissue scraped out. Well, that girl is doing something really horrible, right? She's killing a little baby. But she's likely not sinning at all, right? Because she doesn't know what she's doing. She doesn't know what is really happening there. But she's still going to suffer from that. Chances are when she's 18, 30, 45, she'll think back on that day and think, oh my gosh, I killed my first baby. Now, she might say, no, I didn't want to do it, I didn't know. But you still have that it affects you. It's a truth of a reality that you participated in this, or it was done to you, right? So the damage is still done even though you might be completely innocent. Now, in 1974, the Canadian bishops kind of backtracked on their statement that they issued in 1969. They said a believer has the absolute obligation of conforming his conduct first and foremost to what the church teaches, because first and foremost for the believer is the fact that Christ, through his Spirit, is ever present in his church, and the whole church to be sure, but particularly with those who exercise services within the church and for the church, the first of which services is the apostles. So the Canadian bishop said, yeah, we told you should follow your conscience, but we didn't do a good job telling you about forming our conscience. So we're going to write this new statement, which they did. They told us our first and foremost obligation is to form our conscience in accord with church teaching. Right? How do we do that? Again, we read church documents, We read commentaries, studies, and articles on various matters. We consult with the wise. You go to conferences. Begin to pray. Right? You ask God, what do you want to teach me on this? Humane Vitae came out in 1968, short document, about 35 pages long. Probably take you about 45 minutes to read. I once heard a Protestant minister stand in front of the crowd. Rex Moses was his name, great name, Rex Moses. Rex Moses had converted to Catholicism. He and 14 family members the Easter before. And he was holding Humane Vitae up. And he said, it was a group of priests. He was saying, you priests, he said, you think if you start preaching this, he said, people are going to leave the church. He tells you, I want to tell you they're going to come in. He said, I sat down and I read this document. And I read it once. I read it twice. I read it 3 times. He says, I want to belong to the church. He says, something like that. Right? He was very active in the pro-life movement, and I think his heart had been prepared in a certain way to accept this truth. But his reverence for life, his reverence for new life, and meeting with Catholics who were living in accord with the church's teaching and realizing we weren't whatever scary things he thought we were. But anyway, this notion that read it, right? Read it, sit down, read it, and say, speak to me, God, tell me, open, if this is true, open my heart to it. Like, open my heart and my mind, and let me be shaped by your word and your teaching. This is what Humane Vitae says about the teaching. It says, the church can only conduct herself as did the divine Redeemer. She knows mankind's weakness. She has compassion on the multitude, and she forgives their sins. She cannot, however, do otherwise than to teach the law which is proper to human life, restored to its original truth and guided by the Spirit of God. The teaching of the church about the proper spacing of children is a promulgation of the divine law itself. Again, the church is saying, we can't change this teaching. No more tomorrow we say adultery is right or abortion is okay. This is God's law, not man's law. He says, no doubt many will think this teaching difficult to keep, if not impossible. And truly, just as with all good things outstanding for their nobility and utility, keeping this law requires strong motivation and much effort from individual men, from families, and from society. Indeed, this law is not able to be kept without the abundant grace of God, upon which the good moral choices of men depend and from which they get their strength. Moreover, those who consider this matter thoroughly will see that their efforts to keep God's law increase human dignity and confer benefits on human society. The church knows it's going to be hard, right? But we just have to beg God for the graces, right, to help us do what's difficult to do. This is what Humane Vitae says to healthcare professionals. Let us express our highest admiration for doctors and those health professionals who, in performing their mission, desire to safeguard what is compatible with their Christian vocation rather than what corresponds to some human advantage. You want to safeguard what is compatible with your Christian vocation rather than what corresponds to some human advantage. Therefore, let them constantly pursue only those solutions that are in accord with faith and right reason. And let them strive to gain the agreement and the compliance of their colleagues in this matter. Right? Got to get ourselves straight and then our colleagues. Moreover, let them consider it their special mission to acquire all the necessary learning in this difficult area. Thereby, they may be able to give good advice to spouses seeking their counsel and to direct them along the right path. Spouses rightly seek such direction from them. Dr. O'Connor saved my parents from contraception. My parents have been married for 62 years, right? They are very average. John and Ian Smith are their names, right? If you met them, you'd say, oh my gosh, they're just the most normal human beings you've ever met in your life, right? They've got their faults and their flaws, but they're two of the happiest married people I've ever met in my life, right? And who knows what had happened if they had been contracepted. Now, this is someone you don't listen to, right? You don't listen to. He's not our guide for ethical behavior. John Billings. John Billings is the one who, at the behest of Mother Teresa, discovered natural family planning, right? How we determine when a woman's fertile inner cycle. Mother Teresa, I think it was even before Humane Vitae came out, she approached him and she said, women need help in controlling and limiting their family size. What can you do for them? Try to find out a way that's compatible with God's teaching. Right? And he developed natural family planning. Of course, Mother Teresa's moms here, they all learned natural family planning.